Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Next Step Espresso, the Flat White Chronicles, delivered live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and within our Facebook group. So, if you're listening to this back on a podcast platform and you want to be able to watch this live in person next time and deliver comments and all the rest of it, then I'm getting into a habit of delivering these podcasts live in our free Facebook group. Life Fat Loss for Life with Next Step Nutrition, which is in the link to the notes of today's episode. If you are here live watching, then brilliant. Thank you. You can leave a comment and we can bring it up on the screen, which means that we can make this a little bit interactive, which is cool. But today I wanted to talk to you about disordered eating and Fitspiration and where we sit on this continuum. At the moment, there is a really big argument in the fitness instructor, fitness trainer, influencer sphere all around calorie tracking, intuitive eating, mindful eating, and where people should be on a spectrum for lifelong results, right? And I thought it would be really, really interesting to talk about disordered eating, particularly in line with what we look at online in terms of our Fitspiration friends. So we've talked about disordered eating and normal eating on the podcast before. If you want to look back at those episodes, you absolutely can do. Spotify is probably the best podcast platform to search for episodes in, and you can search disordered eating Next Step Espresso to find the episodes I've done in the past in the sort of solo mini espresso episodes. But just to recap, essentially what disordered eating is. Disordered eating is anything that is against the grain of normal eating patterns, right? And actually, it's very, very normal for most of us to display parts of disordered eating, especially fitness trainers. Okay, it's perfectly normal. And oftentimes these can come out when we start to become much more aware of our eating habits. And awareness through eating habits is created through being mindful of our eating habits and either or not you don't have to, but either or creating a food journal of your eating habits. Now, creating a food journal of your eating habits doesn't need to be tracking your food on MyFitnessPal. That is a certain method for tracking your food. It doesn't need to be the method that you utilize. Everybody turns to it these days because everybody knows of it. We know of MyFitnessPal because of our use of technology. There are plenty of other food tracking apps out there as well. But logging your food or tracking your food or creating a food journal doesn't need to be done on a mobile app. And in fact, if you're to be more mindful about your food intake, then using a trusty notepad like my rough notes notepad here. For those not video, you're missing out on that. I think that's a B&M Bargains find. If you use pen and paper, there is loads of research around pen and paper being much more mindful act, right? You're much more mindful when writing things down on pen and paper than you are even with typing on keys, right? So having some form of food journal with pen and paper can increase awareness, and particularly if you have a specific journal for a specific focus. But that's something I'm going to cover further down in this podcast. So in terms of disordered eating behaviors, they are massively common with many people. And what we need to think of disordered eating is any type of eating that doesn't match our regular physiological needs, so our needs of our body. So whether that's eating too much or too little. And in terms of regularly, I use that language because I'm not talking about the occasional birthday buffet or the occasional Christmas meal, the annual chub up that is Christmas. I'm talking about regularly not eating to your body's need, either too much or too little. They are eating behaviors that interfere and harm our physical, psychological, and personal function. So it can help, it can make us alienated from our own bodies, other people, the world around us. And it's a long-standing occupation with food or eating, a preoccupation with food or eating, or even not eating. So if you're not engaged in disordered eating in that moment, you're thinking about food or you're thinking about not eating, and they are eating behaviors that cause and try to relieve distress. So that's what's really interesting about disordered eating. is that not only does it cause distress, it's actually trying to solve distress as well. Disordered eating is trying to solve some kind of problem within you that you may or may not be aware. And that's so common with food in terms of looking at it as a soother, looking at it for to serve some kind of function. Totally normal, and that comes from our parents, it comes from society, it comes from so many reasons why we use food to potentially soothe certain emotions, right? So disordered eating isn't often the problem is the problem behind disordered eating, right? Disordered eating is complex, interrelated set of behaviors, thoughts, and emotions, and they have a reason, they have a function, they have a purpose, which includes self-soothing, distraction from unpleasant sensations and emotions, signaling distress, avoiding certain experiences or certain challenges, helping to manage situations and feelings that you see as unmanageable or too painful, and that also give us a sense of control. So, disordered eating has a job in our lives, which is why we get used to doing it. And most importantly, it is a coping mechanism and a solution to something else, right? It's a coping solution for something else. And that's why I've definitely not coined this phrase. It's not mine, but food is not the problem. The problem is the problem. Most of our problems with food and exercise have nothing to do with food and exercise and have everything to do with what's being served behind food and exercise. And that's really, really important for us to remember. So, disordered eating can look like many different things for many people, and each person will have a unique combination of habits and behaviors, but they can include any or all of the following: restriction and control. So, tightly controlling your food intake or tightly restricting your food intake. These behaviors are often paired with periods of losing control, binging, overeating. This is where all or nothing comes in. You're either really, really tightly controlling your food intake, or you're off the rails and eating everything in sight. This may or may not also include monitoring your food and your exercise really, really tightly. So, meticulous workout logs that include calories burned, detailing your food journal in terms of both calories, macronutrients, and everything else. And it could also, this restriction and control, involve avoiding particular situations where you have to eat. So you might skip meals or just avoid the situations at all, right? You might avoid parties, you might avoid birthdays or other things in order to just avoid eating because you're worried about the eating not matching your food rules, right? The next point is that disordered eating have certain routines and certain rules, right? Rigid food rules and a specific routine that people feel they have to stick with. So, when you shouldn't or should eat, what you should or shouldn't eat, and also what foods are good or what foods are bad. So, thinking in these ways with specific rules, specific routines isn't normal. And this is where I think Fitspiration has an issue with affecting us as normal human beings, because nowadays we are subjected to meal plans, we're subjected to good versus bad food lists, we're subjected to foods that we should eat to burn belly fat, foods we shouldn't eat to burn belly fat, perfect meal timing for ultimate success, or eat X amount of meals to boost your metabolism, and the amount of misinformation guided by rigid routines and food rules, because it may have worked for an individual, are so rife and really, really difficult to sift through and overcome as someone who's just looking to lose a little bit of body fat, feel a little bit better, and lead a healthier, more balanced life overall as well. Disordered eating comes with a lot of anxiety and avoidance techniques. People will avoid certain situations and they try to avoid feeling bad, right? So you may feel anxious about trouble situations like traveling for work or traveling in general, when you're not sure that the food that's going to be available to you is going to suit your current eating plan or your current food rules, right? You might get anxious and avoid being with other people. You might avoid social situations and birthdays or parties, and you might actually go with them and not eat. But then, because you're skipping meals or feeling bad or having conflicted feelings about social events and your current eating behaviors, that might then trigger overeating episodes and binge behavior, which is really, really common with a lot of people that I work with. Now, trying to change these routines might then also bring a bunch of anxiety, because you've got certain routines around food that you are used to that feel safe for you right now because they are the norm, right? So eating habits and eating routines are very, very personal to people, and can be often very hard to address, and that in itself can cause anxiety. And it's why with our clients in particular, our conversations are not around forcing our clients into a different routine or a different way of eating, or anything else that may or may not work for them. It's about having conversations with the clients about their current routines and rules, and about what is working for them and what may not be working for them. And by asking our clients these open-ended questions and using the phrase, how's that working for you, we're able to dig a lot deeper into the reality of these things and actually find out whether they are serving them or not. And that often opens up a dialogue with a client where they can start to explore these things, rather than us, forcing something new down their throat, which they may or may not be ready for. Now, binging in isolation is a disordered eating habit. There is an eating disorder known as binge eating disorder. And notice my language around this, guys, is I'm talking about disordered eating habits. I'm not talking about eating disorders, because they are very, very different things, right? Binge eating, and objective binge, involves eating an objectively large amount of food for one person, like 2 to 3 pizzas for one person, right? That's an objective binge. Now, a subjective binge involves eating a normal or maybe even small amount of food with that person, but then them having the feeling of compulsion, or they feel like they've lost control. Oh my God, I've eaten a piece of cake. I shouldn't have done that. That was wrong of me. I shouldn't have done that. I've lost control. So binges aren't just about the amount of food, but the feelings that go with them as well. And what differentiates a binge between the simple overeating sense is that feeling of compulsion and that feeling of dissociation, right? So with a binge, you feel a strong sense of urgency. You have to do it right now. And then when you've had your fix, you feel frigging awful. Whereas a normal overeating episode, which is done in conscious thought, is very different from a binge. I may go to, let's take Christmas, for example, the annual chub up that's coming up very soon. With Christmas Day, hell yeah, like I'm going to have 2 portions of food, I'm going to have 2 desserts, I'm going to eat chocolate throughout the day and be basically a bit of a fat pig. Um, and actually, apologies for that language, because it's probably not right. But I'm going to eat a lot of food in that day because I want to. I want to enjoy that food. It's one day. I'm going to be with my family. I'm going to be enjoying delicious food that we don't enjoy very often. I mean, again, we can go into this on another episode or further down this episode. If you're eating chocolate and other foods regularly anyway, as part of your normal food intake and normal diet, for want of a better word, you don't feel the same compulsion to eat these foods in a binge because they're not good or bad, right? And yes, I'm going to overeat because I frigging love turkey dinners with cranberry sauce and all the rest of it, but I do also enjoy the occasional roast dinner now, and I also enjoy chocolate and things in moderation now. So it's not, previously for me, Christmas was a binge where I felt bad. Now I can see Christmas as an overeating day where I feel good about it, and I can just crack back to normal the day after as well. So there's a distinctive difference between conscious overeating and a binge, and it's the feelings that make that difference mostly possible. So the last thing that involves in disordered eating habits is this idea of compensation and bargaining, right? Purging, or compensation, is really, really common with people with disordered eating. And again, purging doesn't necessarily need to mean throwing up, although it can. And again, if that happens really super regularly, then we're looking at someone who might have bulimia, which is another eating disorder. But in isolatory episodes, it's just a form of disordered eating. But bulimia and disordered eating also covers over exercising and tight fasting and restriction. So, compensating with fasting, compensating with eating less food, compensating with more exercise, exercising in order to burn calories, in order to eat more food, is another example of disordered eating, right? It's natural to be aware of the calorie burn of exercise, particularly when you're exercising at a higher volume or for a certain sport or for a certain performance outcome, because that's just good sports nutrition, right? Being aware of your calorie output in order to fuel and recover effectively is good sports nutrition. Using calories burned as a measure for you to lose body fat and to do so after you've eaten a lot of food, or to do so in order to eat more food, is a disordered eating behavior. And I'm going to be very careful with my language here, because this is not to judge or pass judgment on other people. This episode is merely to identify behaviors of disordered eating, which I've mentioned are extremely common with both fitness professionals and regular people, and to highlight why a lot of Fitspiration these days can highlight disordered eating behaviors. So if we look back those specific rules, right, we've got rigid rules and routines. We've got anxiety and avoidance of certain behaviors and routines again. And we've got the idea of overcompensation and binging as disordered eating practices. Now let's look at Fitspiration. We've got people who are telling us to count all of our calories. Yes, okay, maybe it's in the line of flexible dieting, but flexible dieting, in terms of if it fits your calories or if it fits your macros, is still a set of food rules. It's just a more flexible set of food rules compared to a rigid dieting persona. And a rigid dieting persona would be something like the keto diet or the Atkins diet, or even following a meal plan where you had to eat the exact foods on that meal plan in the exact quantities at the exact times of the day. So although flexible dieting is one step further on a continuum of how to eat in a sort of, abolishing food rule manner, flexible dieting is still food rules, and it is still a type of disordered eating behavior. And I'm someone who is a flexible dieting coach in the mind that I want my clients to, abolish good versus bad thinking when it comes to foods, enjoy a variety of foods and a flexible food profile, ranging from chocolate and ice cream, pizza and chips, to friggin' salads and lean meats and fishes and fruits and vegetables. But flexible dieting in a way of, if it fits your macros, eat whatever you want as long as it fits your calories and macros, and as long as you don't eat like a child at a buffet party, that's still a set of food rules. It's just one step further away from rigid dieting, right? So with our Fitspiration friends, and if you're listening to this as a fitness professional, I used to just give macros as a blank prescription as well. I used to think that macronutrient tracking and calorie tracking was the only way to teach clients awareness of their food intake and educate them on their food intake, but it's not, right? You can educate your clients on food intake in your consultations with them, in your email series with them. You can educate them on their food intake by providing them follow-up materials to read, or asking what information they already know and then providing them with information to fill the gaps. You can ask your clients to track your food with pen and paper, and you can ask them how they feel about their food. You can get them to track their eating behaviors and eating habits. You don't need to use calorie tracking and calorie targets in order to help your clients or yourself get results. That is just one method. And for everyone that says calorie tracking is the best way to learn intuition, that's wrong, right? And I realize, as people who may have dieted for a long time or who may have a lot of weight to lose, their intuition might be really far away from them right now, but that doesn't mean we can't start working towards them using guideline approaches, maybe eating skill approaches, maybe, which Josh Hillis talks about really, really well in our last podcast, but also using education, compassionate coaching, behavior change principles and habits to help people adopt healthy change long term, rather than sticking to some form of food rule or food routine. Because for the one person that does really well with calorie tracking, who might have a data driven mindset and a personality profile that really fits with it, there are many, many other people who don't like calorie tracking, who find it obsessive, who find it rigid, who find that it inspires all or nothing thinking within them. And therefore, no matter how much you think this is the best method to teach our clients what to do, it's not going to be the best method for them because it isn't working for them. And we need to then understand that calorie tracking is a type of food rule. It is a type of food rule. And there are other tools in a toolbox that we can use as coaches and practitioners to help our clients get results. So I really want you guys to think about, what is the difference between fitspiration, okay, what I eat in a day, versus what is normal eating, right? And normal eating habits will include not thinking about food in good or bad thinking, not overthinking or underthinking our food choices, making food choices that match our values, our goals, and understanding how they affect our feelings, our energy, and our health. Enjoying food without necessarily getting emotional comfort from them, but knowing that they can provide emotional comfort in certain situations. Whether or not we want that to happen is totally a value driven choice. Normal eating includes eating when physically hungry and stopping when physically full, which again, I know that's not a fat loss paradigm, but once you start moving towards actual hunger driven food cues, okay, you may now be in a position where you want to drop body fat, but improving your relationship with food comes first. And now we can look at intentional fat loss. And intentional fat loss does involve reducing our caloric intake, but that can be done through one, increasing our movement, both exercise and our non exercise activity. And it can also be done with generic habits and eating skills. We can look at eating with smaller plates and smaller portions, and eating slower, and eating fewer junk foods and more vegetables. These are all habits that we can use to instigate fat loss, both within ourselves and with our clients, that have nothing to do with tracking the calories that are in our food. So yes, tracking calories can be used as education, but if you think it's the only way to instigate that education within people, I do invite you to come at me at the comments with your discussion, because I would love to talk with you about that, and talk with you about why I believe differently. But going back to behaviors of normal eating, we've got enjoying when hungry, may or may not indulge in cravings, again, based on how we're feeling in that situation, staying connected with our physical cues of hunger, eating mindfully with awareness, and being able to adapt to different routines and be flexible with our approaches depending on the situation, right? Context is king in every situation, and our values are king in every situation. So to sum up, it's normal for you to be experiencing disordered eating behaviors. And actually, many of the fitness professionals who are out there in this world have disordered eating behaviors as well. And a lot of fitspiration, with air quotes, is disordered eating. And the more that we can move towards normal eating behaviors, values based decision making, and focusing on our eating behaviors and eating skills, the better we're all going to be at this whole losing fat and keeping it off for life, while improving and nurturing our relationships with food. So I really hope that you've enjoyed that episode, guys. If you have, please do smash the like button, especially if you're watching this on YouTube. Make sure you hit the subscribe button as well, so that you get a new longer form podcast in your inbox every Friday. If you don't follow Next Step Espresso, then please do. It's a short daily episode, Monday to Thursday, with a longer form deep dive like this on a Friday, usually with a guest, sometimes just with me. And if you want more help from me and from Next Step Nutrition, then do join our free Facebook group, which is in the link to the show notes of this episode. But thank you again for coming to, or listening to, or watching Next Step Espresso. I absolutely love the fact that even one person downloads this podcast, and I really appreciate all of you. So have a great Friday, guys. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you again on Monday for another daily shot of fitness.